them evidence. Opinions really, they're not evidence.
Right.
You got to have hardcore facts. You have to go out and get the data. You have to go discover things. Like, tell me why. Don't just tell me your opinion and then reinforce it by talking to someone just like you. So those are the difficulties in teaching journalism right now. Not only in teaching journalism, but trying to get others outside of the educational system to understand what real journalism is.
Guys, I'm very excited to have Carol Costello join us for the Ripple Effect podcast today. You might know Carol from her time as an anchor at CNN and eventually Headline News. She's now a special advisor out at Loyola Marymount University in California and working on what else? Journalism. She is one of these people that I've looked up to and long since admired because of her ease of interviews and just the approach that she took to make her guests feel comfortable. But she could ask the hard-hitting questions and she could pull the best out of people. And I'm just really, really inspired by her. I'm so grateful that she agreed to be a part of the Ripple Effect podcast. She also has her own podcast called Carol Costello Presents Blind Rage. So I hope we'll talk about that a little bit today. She is amazing. I am super excited about this interview. So let's dive right in. Guys, I'm super excited to have Carol Costello join us for the Ripple Effect podcast. Carol, welcome. How are you this morning?
I'm good. It's very early here in California, so if I'm a little groggy, you'll understand why.
I did not realize when we scheduled this originally, it would be this early for you. So I appreciate you getting up and doing this. And wow, I'm impressed. But of course, you being, when you were on your time at CNN, you were used to getting up really early, right?
It's amazing how your body bounces back to normal sleeping habits because I used to wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning
Oh
and
my
I'd work
gosh.
like 10 to 12 hours and did it again the next day. And then, when I left CNN, I thought I would continue getting up at 2 or 3 in the morning. No,
I
I
mean,
slept
why would
until
you, right?
5.
Yeah. Well, I always like to start these interviews off with a little bit of an origin story just to give our audience a little bit of a background and history of you. And, if you don't mind, maybe just share a little bit about, kind of where you grew up. I know you're a Midwestern gal, and I know you are a huge Detroit Tigers fan. So there's all these things I have to, we got to dig into, but just give our audience just a little sense of your background and your history.
I grew up in I was born in Canton, Ohio, and
Okay.
I went to high school in Minerva, Ohio, which is very rural and tiny. So, and gosh, I always wanted to be a newscaster or a reporter.
Really?
I really did, ever since I was 12 years old, and that's all I've really ever done until now. So I went to college, I got an internship, I got my job out of college at TV 23 in Akron, Ohio, and then I went to Toledo, Columbus, Baltimore, Washington, Indianapolis, and then CNN. And I
Wow.
finished up my career there. So 35 years. So
Wow.
I'm a lucky person. I got to
Yeah.
live my dream.
Well, what was it about journalism that really was, sort of the attractor factor?
You get to witness history firsthand.
Yeah.
You actually can change the world. I know people are down on journalists today for good reasons,
Yeah.
but you really can still change the world. And I tell that to my students all the time. You actually can.
Yeah. So
So that's what attracted me.
expand upon that a little bit for my audience so that they understand what you mean by that and sort of what you're trying to get across to your students.
I'll tell you a really dumb story. At least I thought it was dumb when I was, I don't know, 22. You can change people's worlds in small ways and in big ways.
Yep.
So I remember I used to get assigned the most ridiculous stories as a young reporter because, I was a cute girl reporter. So let's give her all the, light, um, you know, fluffy stories, I
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
So anyway, this retired police officer with cancer had lost his pet parrot. And my
Oh.
news director actually sent me to do a story on this. And then I'm like, oh my God, I went to college for this. I want to change the world and I'm doing stories on lost parrots.
Wait, to clarify, was it lost like it just gotten out or
Yeah,
passed
he had it
away?
in a cage. It got out of its cage and it flew
Okay.
away.
All right.
No, we didn't it didn't die, that would be so terrible. So, so I do the story, I interview the cancer-stricken police officer, and, I did the story that night with the stand-up and everything, "Please help if you see this lost bird." I'm feeling so ridiculous. So, lo and behold, somebody finds this guy's bird, and it's returned. I don't remember the details, maybe I blocked it out of my mind, but the bird was returned. I went and did a follow-up story, and I'm telling you, that man was so happy,
Uh,
and you could see the effect it had on him in real time because I was there with him,
yeah.
and it filled me with hope, I must say, and the audience loved him, loved the bird, and loved me for doing
That
such a small thing for someone.
yeah. Well, that's
So
that's often what we talk about with the ripple, right? Sometimes it's our smallest acts that make the biggest impact, and we think they're small and insignificant at the time, but they have a huge impact, and obviously that's stuck with you for all these
a
years.
huge impact, and, there are bigger ways that, I've altered the world, I'll say, but I think that example just shows you that, you don't realize the impact you have, and in journalism, you touch so many people's lives in so many ways you can't imagine,
Yeah.
and that's why I love journalism so much.
Well, so with what you're doing today, you're teaching journalism for Loyola Marymount, right? And you get an opportunity to sort of share your approach, your philosophies, the direction that you came up with in the news business. How have you seen the news business change, and then what are you telling your students about how to approach this new world of journalism?
Uh, I won't lie, it's very difficult. It's extremely
Yeah,
difficult to teach journalism
yeah,
today.
yeah,
Because for those young people, they've grown up watching journalism as it is today, and it is partisan, right? And
yes,
nobody knows what it is anymore. Like, what is journalism?
yeah,
And it used to be so simple. You go out, you gather information for people, you put it into context, and then you allow them to make their own decisions about what you found out for them. But
hmm,
as you know, it's not as simple as that anymore.
yeah,
And I don't think it can ever be that simple, right? Because it's changed so much. So today you sort of have to teach students that A, they have to open their minds, which is difficult for pretty much all of us.
yeah,
Because again, those kids have grown up with closed minds because,
hmm,
the adults around them have closed minds. If you think differently from someone, you're the enemy. And how do you change that in a young person's mind when they've grown up with that sentiment?
yes,
That is dangerous for our country.
yes.
So even that is really difficult to get through to young people. And I could give you a million examples of oh god, evidence-based, teaching them evidence. Opinions really, they're not evidence.
Right.
You got to have hardcore facts. You have to go out and get the data. You have to go discover things. Like, tell me why. Don't just tell me your opinion and then reinforce it by talking to someone just like you. So those are the difficulties in teaching journalism right now. Not only in teaching journalism, but trying to get others outside of the educational system to understand what real journalism is.
Yeah.
It's not to be loved. It's not to be liked. It's not to stay in your bubble. It's to take the shots and deal with it and do your job.
Which is tough for them to understand because they grew up in a world where, everything is around that social influence, right? And like you said, there's that that aspect of where they, sort of the generation that they've grown up in where there's a lot of closed-minded, influences. And then on the opposite side, you have to do things for sensationalism, right? To get the likes and to get the views. And
That's
the
right.
challenge is there.
And just think about the first presidential election they became aware of, like this generation of students, the
Yeah.
students I'm teaching now. It was 2016,
Yeah.
2020. That's the only politics they've known. At least we can think of a normal time because
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
participated in
That's right.
those normal times, quote unquote. They have never done that. They've only lived in this world. And so I'm telling you, it's really hard to navigate, and I just hope that, things change at a national political level because that's where everything is happening right now, and
Yeah.
then it trickles down.
Yeah. So how do you what's your secret weapon to get a student to open up and look at that from a different perspective?
I force them to get the other I'll just tell you a quick story. Oh
I
my
love
god.
it.
Okay, so quick story. So, I taught a digital journalism class last fall, and I assigned topics to groups of students to go out and they did a mini documentary. And one of the topics was abortion.
Ooh.
Young people are very pro-choice
Mhm.
in general. The
Sure.
statistics show it. So
Yep.
I'm giving you hard data.
Yeah.
You look it up, right?
Yep.
But to me, they have to open their minds and find out why many, many other people are not. Um, so I said to this particular group, I said, you have to go and talk to a pro life group. Oh, we can't. I don't think there are any in California. I'm like, what? Of course there are. What do you think? We've banned them from the
Yeah.
state?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are many pockets of California that are conservative
Yeah.
that people don't really think about. So I actually made them find a group which was located in Pasadena, which was not so far from Los Angeles. And they went and they talked to a woman there. And and they said afterwards they were so shaken that they had to join hands and just take a minute. And I'm like, oh my God, she was a person who had her beliefs.
Yeah.
And you have to listen
Yeah.
because to understand what's happening right now in the country surrounding that issue, you kind of have to understand what she's saying and from where she's coming from.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily evil, right?
Yeah. Right.
So
It's
that's
just different.
my it's
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah.
And then, maybe if we actually listen to one another, maybe we can find common ground. Maybe we can understand. Maybe you can fight the fight better if you want to become an activist and not a journalist. But you need to understand. And the only way you understand is by talking to people outside of your bubble. So that's my tiny secret weapon to open their minds and to teach, what journalism really is.
That's great. I love that. I would imagine with the challenges that up and coming students face relative to say social media and that influence, and when you know back in the day when you probably first got into the business, where I remember going through a journalism class and the teacher reminding us that we weren't to be part of the story, right? We were there just purely to gather facts. And now it seems like there's this sensationalism aspect to the journalistic journey, right, where you're not only getting the story but you also are sort of the story. How do you navigate that challenge when social media, especially for this new generation, is kind of all they've grown up on?
Oh, that's a tough one. You know,
I mean, is
I
it
have
even possible at this point?
well, there are journalists out there who have not become part of the story. And if you
Yeah.
watch ABC News or CBS News or
Yep.
60 Minutes, they don't become part of the
Right.
story. 60 Minutes especially, they have tons of viewers. So people are still open to that.
Yeah.
I think that we conflate cable news with with I don't know what to call it, with the network news
Yep.
or 60 Minutes, the traditional news that you grew up watching. We conflate those two. Cable news is a different animal, and it always has been. And I
Yeah.
think people have forgotten that, right?
Yeah.
So, um, Fox and MSNBC are partisan networks. Those anchors and reporters are part of the story because that's their mission at their network.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, they lie about it sometimes, but that is the truth. CNN is trying to become something different. I hope it succeeds because there are many amazing journalists there, and I loved every moment I worked there. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to malign CNN, but it is trying. But I think it has this outsized reputation that it sets the standard for all news, and I'm not sure that that's fair.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is strange how the news cycle has impacted us as viewers and really where we get that news from. It used to be, the network news. That was your trusted resource to go to. And I saw something recently that showed how they're really in, viewer decline because everybody just transfers back over to the cable news, area. And if there's an agenda being pushed or a narrative that, that you tend to operate in those silos, right? And that can be super dangerous. And I think from a maybe a journalistic perspective, someone that's maybe thinking about that from a career path perspective, when they look at that and then they double that with the challenges of the social media aspect, I can imagine it's difficult to get, to break through that and say, look, you have to do these things differently. That, the next generation of newscasters has to, journalists have to do it better.
Well, I think what's happening is linear television is on its way out. Like, people don't watch news on television younger. Old people do, and we're splitting the old people, and I'm sorry, when you're older, your minds are made up. You're
That's
not gonna
yep.
change your mind. You're not gonna change. So, older people are watching linear television, and they're trying to figure out how to make it work because that's still where you make all your money.
Hmm.
They wanna go to online news, mostly, but it's really hard to make money there.
Yep.
Young people do get their news online. I get my news online. I read all my stuff online.
Yep.
So, I even watch CNN online. I watch ABC News online. I read the Wall Street Journal online. So it's all moving there anyway. Um, to me, the danger in that is you pick and choose what you want to watch or read.
Yep.
So you
Yep.
remain in your bubble.
Yep.
The trick is to get people to go outside of that, or to get news organizations to be more well rounded. That's the ticket online. I don't think the answer is gonna be found in cable news on television or ABC. I just don't think so. It's gonna be found online.
What are some of your more trusted resources, if you would be open to sharing, that you go to, that, when, the average, American that, is trying to figure out where they should fall, where is the best place for sort of that, unfiltered but, true and accurate reporting?
Well, I always tell my students to be skeptical,
I love that.
right?
Yep.
Right? You have a brain. It's up to you to find the real information, and if you don't do that, you're kinda lazy, intellectually lazy, which I
Yeah.
find many Americans are. It's
Yeah.
much easier to sit there and just listen to someone. It pains me to say that, but that is true.
That's our reality. Yep.
That's right. So when I seek news, I read so many things. I listen to I listen to podcasts a lot. In fact, that's becoming increasingly popular among young people as a source for news, because you know where that person's coming from,
Hmm.
right? And podcasts are able to go more in depth than other mediums, and I think people really like that. One topic,
Yep. Yep.
like today, right? If you're interested in this topic, you're going to listen, and you're going to be well informed because you're going to listen all the way through. And it's not traditional media where you have to completely buy in,
Yeah.
because you'll have your own opinions after this, right? So that's cool. So I listen to podcasts. I do subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times. I do read the Daily Mail for fun. Nothing on there. Please don't believe that because it's a bunch of crap, but it's fun to read, right?
Yeah.
Um, what else do I do? Watching linear television, I
Yeah.
watch 60 Minutes in ABC News and CNN sometimes.
Yeah.
So I never watch Fox or MSNBC.
Yeah.
I just don't.
What do you miss about the being in the news game? I know you're still in it from a different perspective. I mean, you're shaping the minds of our future journalists, but from being on camera, which, by the way, you were phenomenal. I mean, you were one of my all-time favorites because you just had a amazing way of putting anyone you were interviewing at ease, but still getting to the heart of whatever the issue is. Even if it was something that, was challenging or controversial, you still were able to make that interview come across with, being respectful and very committed to letting that person express what they needed to share. And I always loved that. I just thought you just did an amazing job.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I think that just comes, I'm a really curious person. I really like to know what makes you tick, what you think. Um, and I think that I have that Midwestern thing, whatever that is. I don't know what that
There
is.
is a thing. I can guarantee you. Yeah.
There really is a thing. I do
Yeah.
believe that. So, and I'm genuine. I think if you show genuine interest in people, they
Yep.
respond, as
Yeah.
you know. Yeah. The thing I miss the most is storytelling, right? To go out to different parts of the country and to tell stories. I always enjoyed talking more to I don't know, the common person, the person who wasn't famous, the person
Yep.
who didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I enjoyed telling their stories a lot more than I did the other. And I still do. I think that there are plenty of people out there interviewing famous people, and the famous people are spewing crap that you some right? I don't know. It's like, why should I listen to this person because they're X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
So I just enjoy human interest stories so much more, focusing on different kinds of people across the country. That's what I miss is being sent out there, especially during election time. I really did
Yeah.
enjoy that. I always went back to Ohio to cover Ohio um, when the election came around. So those are the things I miss, or being in the middle of a giant news story that's breaking. I do
Yep.
miss that. There's
Yeah.
nothing like that. That gets your blood pumping.
Do you ever envision going back and, taking in, kind of another lap in that space, or not really?
Well, I did it for 35 years.
Yeah.
I thought that was
You
enough.
started when you were 5, so I mean,
Yeah,
clearly.
right. I did start really young, like around, I think I was 20 or so. But it was just, I just think it was enough. And I think after a while, you just want the freedom to tell stories the way you want to tell stories.
Yeah.
Because, in a network, you're sort of beholden to the way they want you to tell a story, or, they're the ones calling the coverage. I mean, you do have
Yep.
some influence as an anchor, but, they have veto power.
Yeah.
So I like the freedom of telling my own stories my way, which is why I started to do podcasting myself.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The Carol Costello presents Blind Rage. I mean, just premiered this year, right? So tell us about this show. I mean, I'm excited to hear more about it.
Well, it's a story I've always wanted to tell, and I never was able to tell it when I was in the news business, for various reasons. But when I was 22, working in Akron, Ohio at TV 23 WAKR radio, I was assigned this huge story about this brutal crime. And when you're a young reporter, they just kind of throw you into the fire. Nobody really teaches you.
Right.
And you're really not taught to deal with traumatic events when you're in college, or how to interview someone who's been through extreme trauma. You're just not equipped. You
Yeah.
don't really believe evil walks the world like that, or that could happen to that person, or how that person might feel, or how that crime affects you as a person. So this particular case stuck with me for all these years, and I've covered like 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. I mean, I've covered big, big tragic stories,
Yeah.
Sandy
Yeah.
Hook, all
Yeah.
those things. But this particular story has always stuck with me. So I decided I had to sit down and tell it from every angle I could possibly think of, about how one crime affects so many different people, the victim's family, the detectives who investigate the case, the prosecutors who try the case, the defense attorneys, um, and the reporter who doesn't quite know what she's doing, who messed up a lot during that story, and but who tried their best, and how that all comes back on the shoulders of that survivor,
Hmm.
and how those survivors are really the true heroes of these true crime stories that are so often overlooked when we concentrate on people like Jeffrey Dahmer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, To me, the hero in my story is Phyllis Cottle, the survivor. Um, and when you listen to the podcast, you'll certainly know why. She was an amazing, strong, pioneering woman that taught me a lot. So that's why I wanted to tell this particular story.
Well, I've listened to the first several episodes. I'm hooked, I will tell you. I mean,
Thank
in
you.
fact, I can tell you after listening to the first 2, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, somebody's gonna come and make this into something," right? They're gonna take this story and the way that you tell it, you're just gifted in that regard. So you've definitely found your next true calling in my opinion. But it really just looked like this could easily be made into something you'd see on HBO or a docu-series of some sort, because it is really, really well done. So I encourage our listeners to be sure to go subscribe and check out the show, because it's amazing.
Thank you so much. It was a labor of love. It really was. I was so nervous doing it because I wanted the family to at least like it. And I know I've just said you shouldn't worry about what people tell you. No, think about your stories as a reporter. But in this case, I really wanted the family to like it. And and they did, and they sent me a text, and I felt so good.
Oh,
Like,
good. Whew. Yeah.
whoa, right? Because they're pretty amazing too, her family.
Yeah. Well, so talk about that process. So you had the ideation of telling this story in more of a drawn out process. How was that in comparison to what you might have done, in your prior stint, in the news business? Obviously, you have a lot of luxury and flexibility in a podcast platform.
Well, this story was so personal, that made it different. And
Yeah,
in some respects, I was the story in that podcast,
yeah,
and that was very different for me. And it's funny, even though that crime happened so many years ago, I guess more than 30 years ago, it seemed like I was right back in that place. I was back to being the 22-year-old version of myself. And then sometimes I would snap out of it and say, "What the hell was I thinking?" Right?
right. Youth
And
and
then you discover
inexperience, right?
you've been inexperienced. And I covered that case from the time it happened. I sat through the whole court proceedings and everything. Um, and I didn't know so much as a reporter. So that was the other surprising thing that came of this podcast. I found out so much interesting new information that I never knew when I was actually covering the case, that I think would have been helpful for me to know. Because as you know, the police keep so many things from reporters,
Yeah,
sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes you go, I don't understand that.
yeah.
And in this case, it was so many times I don't really understand that. Or, you go back, and in those days, you didn't really care so much about the person perpetrating the crime, but we should have back then.
Hmm.
We should have, because he was a symptom of so much that was wrong in the city of Akron at that time and cities across the country.
Yeah,
And you could argue same problems, right?
yeah.
Same problems. So, you know, I realized my mistakes as a young reporter, and B, my vulnerability, and C, my renewed hero worship of Phyllis Cottle, the
Yeah.
survivor.
That's awesome. Well, this one it's is it 10 parts?
12.
12. Okay. So 12-part
Mhm.
series. And are you going to do another one?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, I am.
I'm a fan.
I'm doing bonus episodes right now, um, but I'm going to work with the prosecutor that I worked with for Blind Rage, Emily Pelfrey, and we're going to do another true crime. And we're actually having a meeting on Wednesday, so I'm hoping to have that out. Well, you know how long it takes, so
Yeah.
it'll be a good 3 or 4 months. But yeah, we're working on the next one, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah. Well, we'll have to have you back and you can talk about that one at the time.
That would be
So
awesome.
let me switch gears back, for a second, just to ask you what, from a journalist perspective, what do you think the three most important questions we should be asking right now as Americans, as we look at the news, as we absorb our different, news sources? Because I think you have a very unusual or very unique perspective, and I think that, like you said, we kind of have a tendency to grow up in our kind of own, kind of isolated environments, especially now where we're only paying attention to certain directions where we get our news. What do you think three questions that we should be asking just to test that? We have the brain, we have the a way to think, but I'm curious. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I would
Hmm.
love to get your perspective on that.
Well, my favorite question as a journalist is why? Why? I mean, if you could only ask one question, it would be why.
Yeah,
If you keep asking that one question, why? Why do you think that? Well, why do you think it's that way?
yeah,
Right? It takes you so many places and it forces the other person to really think about why. Because I think sometimes when we talk and we spew our opinions and vitriol, we don't think about where it comes from,
yeah,
right? So maybe that's the second question. Why? Where does that come from?
yeah.
And what does it matter?
Oh, I love
What
that.
does it matter?
Yeah,
That's the third one.
that's a good one.
Yeah, because you'll find in the answer to that question, what does it matter? Many times it just doesn't.
Yeah. Which if you're trying to think about those things, then when you get to that point and it doesn't matter, it means you don't need to spew it on Facebook, right? Or you
That's
don't
right.
really need to, in relationships over it because you're so dug in on the perspective.
It's so true.
Yeah.
That would fit into every facet of life. You were right.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
yes, that's what I tell my students. You need to answer those questions and start with the why. And that will lead you to so many other things.
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, that's excellent advice.
Because I think when people listen to voices within their bubbles, they don't really think about it in any with any kind of depth or how it fits into their own lives
Yeah.
or how
Yeah.
it affects them, right? But if they really expanded their mind just a tiny fraction,
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
tiny bit, thought for themselves, I think that oh, the country would be in a much better place.
I agree. Well, I talk a lot about relationships and the ability to connect a little better. And one of the things I always tell people is that, we're really good at the surface connections. I think we're really good at the surface connections, with people, but also our news sources and the way that we interpret and take in information. We never dig below that, right? And that when you dig below that, that's where the real story is. That's where the real value. And so when it comes to connecting with people, it's, oh, so what do you do? And there's the professional aspect and a little bit of detail about what that person sort of is about, but nobody ever digs beyond that. And the thing that I've always admired from about journalists like yourself is that you didn't open with the surface questions. It was like let's go deep and let's try and go deeper if we can. And I think for true connection, that's where you really learn to connect and engage with people. I was speaking at a conference 2 weeks ago, and I was talking to this audience of leaders, and I expressed to them, I said, the reality is that if we're building our networks and we're growing these connections, these personal or professional connections, you have to dig below the surface and you've got to look for those people that you have similarities to, but then, don't run from, but really explore the differences. And that's where I feel like you said, in today's country, it's we don't have those dialogues. We don't really understand how to engage in conversation and really get to know people that come from opposing, backgrounds and experiences and views of the world. But there's so much that can be gained by understanding that.
We make assumptions about people
Yep.
now. If you voted for this person or that person, you must be this kind of
Yeah.
person. Or you live in a certain state. That's another thing I teach
Yeah.
because, I'm from Ohio. I live in California. Those
Yeah.
two states don't like each
Very
other.
different.
And I'm generalizing, right?
Very much.
So, So I take my Los Angeles students to Canton, Ohio, to Cleveland, right, to my alma mater, which is Kent State in Ohio, and I also mentor Kent students, and I take them to California, and I connect those students. They're not so different. They're just
No,
not, right?
no.
Uh, there was this poll out that's so disturbing, and, actually, my student journalists are doing a story on it right now, that, if someone who's gonna room with you in a dorm has different political opinions, you want nothing to do with that person, and nor do you wanna room with that person.
Wow.
Isn't that isn't that crazy? I mean, did you think about that in college when you
No.
were rooming with someone? "Oh, I wonder if they're a Democrat or a Republican."
Right. No, no.
But it's a thing now, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I've hooked up student journalists in, from LMU, where I teach in Los Angeles, and at Kent in Ohio, so that they can work on that story together,
Oh,
right? And figure out why. Like, where does that come from? I mean, you're 18 years old. You're not exactly like engaged completely in politics because you're
right,
not.
right,
You might be on social issue, cultural issues, right? Because you don't pay taxes or own a home, so you don't care
right.
about economic issues. So, like, where does that come from? Where did you learn that? Do you
Yeah,
even know if you're a Democrat or Republican right now? And what defines that?
yeah,
Are you an independent? Does it matter if you're right or left leaning? Does that matter? Like, how left leading do you have to be not to want to room with someone who's right leaning?
yeah.
So I want them to take that and go deep.
That's a brilliant assignment, and so important because they need to be able to understand how to interact and engage with someone that comes from a different perspective, right? And the sad thing that where I think we are, unfortunately, over the last several years, we now just we automatically categorize people based on religious belief, where they fall in the abortion issue, where the politics are, and we dig in our heels because we're so much more right than anybody else on the opposite end is they're just so wrong. And the challenge with that is we create a really disconnected society, people that aren't thinking for themselves, think people that aren't open to new ideas and the possibility of exploring those ideas with someone who has a different perspective and a different point of view. And then we put them into companies and expect them to get along, right? And work well together in the sandbox when we've raised them to be completely polar opposites of one another. And then it's stimulated with all these outside influences like social media and just various media outlets. And that's concerning. It's real concerning.
Yeah, the pickle is how to break through. And then if you do break through, then you think, well, will it last or will they just revert? And I think about that all the time because I know that I open minds because, I have student testimonials and I see it in real time. And it's quite emotional at times. I've had students cry in class. I mean, it's
Hmm.
really
Yeah.
interesting. It's like a sociological study. But then I wonder, will it last outside of school or will they just slowly return to their bubbles? And I don't know the answer to that. I honestly
And my
don't.
fear is they will, because if you don't have constant reinforcement and those reminders to say, hey, LMU and Kent folks need to continue that conversation. How do we build those relationships beyond the class? How do we keep those people in our friend zone or build them into our personal or professional networks in some capacity? So that we always have somebody that we can always kind of depend on. Hey, what's going on your end? To give me a perspective. Let me understand it. Why? Right? Like you said, how does that make you feel? Let me get out of the story so that I can actually have a perspective. And that's where I think we really are falling down. We've gone so backwards in so many ways. When I first wrote this book, the ripple effect, way back when, all I thought I was doing was just kind of helping introverted people figure out a better way to connect. And what I've actually found is now in today's world, it's just like with everything that we have at our fingertips, we're more connected than we ever have been. But at the end of the day, we are worse than we've ever been at connecting. Then we wonder why we're isolated and lonely. And then you have people that take these really crazy one side or the other approaches to how they're going to spew their attitudes or their approach to life or their political views, religious views, etc. And it just creates this whole, just this, really frustrated kind of populace that it's sad because we can't have a conversation anymore. We can't just have a sit down over a cup of coffee and have different opinions, but get to hear and understand what somebody else is saying because we just dig in.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You know that um, loneliness is now akin to, I don't know, smoking 15 cigarettes a day or
Yep.
whatever
Yeah.
thing they
Yeah.
threw out there. Um, and what you've just said just reinforced that, right? We've just become lonely, and it's partially we've forgotten how to talk to one another. I
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
what it is.
It's so true. I mean, we wouldn't say some of these things to one another face to face across the table, but we'd have no problem being a keyboard warrior and doing it, or slamming somebody online for their opinion or their approach. But that's the challenge, I think, and one of the sad realities is with the new generation that comes up. That's all they've known, right? So how do you get them out of the device mindset and say, here's how you have a conversation, here's how you talk, here's how you actually learn from those conversations so that you can now start thinking for yourself, or at least be open to new attitudes and ideas.
I know, and every day there comes a new split. Like now, the new split is between people with a college education and people without, and somehow they just can't get along. Or the people who have a college education are elitist, and they're not loving or down to earth. They're
Yeah.
just snotty, money grubbing, and that's just not my students. I
No.
don't know.
Ah.
I know. I always like when people accuse professors of brainwashing students. I'm like, wow, I wish I had that power. Be so much easier to teach.
Oh, that's funny. I love that.
Really would be.
Well,
But I don't.
well,
Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go ahead. I don't want to cut you off there.
No, no. I work at a Jesuit institution, so we educate the whole person, and what that actually means is that life is more about than just making money.
Yeah.
You have to do for others through your whole life, through your whole career, and I don't know. If I had kids, I'd want them educated that way. I don't
Yeah.
think that's a bad thing,
No,
right?
no, and so needed right now
I
in
know.
today's world. I mean, defining what a good person is a good place to start. Having an understanding that you actually want to contribute in a positive way to society, do something, for the sake of doing good, for other people and for yourself. But at the end of the day, it comes down to especially now as you look out, we have, reached an age where we have that perspective where it's like, we want to have, done something good with our career paths, that we made a difference. And at the end of the day, trying to get young people to understand that it's like, you need to contribute in some capacity to this world being better, getting better, having better conversations, and being more accepting, because there are a lot of ways that we can go the opposite direction, and it's just not a good way for the country to go, and we see it. So
We do, and I think we've forgotten that to do good for others, or to at least listen to them respectfully, makes us feel better.
absolutely.
Like, when you argue with someone, I don't come away from that argument with, like, great feelings about myself, even if I've won the argument,
Right.
because what did it again, we're going back to the what did it really mean, and what does it
Yeah.
really matter?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter 9 times out of 10. So if I'm having a respectful conversation with someone, and it evolves into an argument, and I somehow find a way out of that argument respectfully, I feel so good about myself.
Yeah.
Like, wow, I diffused that situation. And when I see that person again, I'm going to be able to say hello and not feel like an ass, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and you don't have the resentment, right? That's the problem, is that we can't bury the hatchet because we don't know how to get ourselves out of those conflicts. And I always tell my audience that, resentment is just the super secret promise of revenge, right? So at some point I'll get you. It may not be today, but it'll be, soon. And that's the sad thing is, what I always like to get people to think about is even somebody that you don't agree with, maybe, far outside of where your purview is, but if you can learn from them, learn what, is important. I think that's the beautiful thing that you illustrated about being a journalist, is pulling that story out, getting an appreciation for them. You may not agree with it, but at the end of the day, you now have a different perspective than you walked in with. And I call those things connection points. The connection points are things that you can find that you actually have, not only maybe where you didn't agree, but you can find some commonalities where you can find something. And those connection points could be your favorite sports team. It could be the fact you're in the same degree plan. It just could be that you both grew up in really challenging home environments, but that becomes the thing that makes them unique to you. And when you have that in common, that person and yourself are more likely to have at least a little bit more respectful conversation and dialogue, working relationship, better interview, whatever it might be, right?
I know. I was telling Stu, you don't have to like that other person. You just don't. But you do have to listen,
Yeah,
right? Because someday you might need that person.
that's right.
And then you'll be able to go back and ask for help, and the help will be granted.
Yep.
The other way doesn't work so well, right?
Guarantees that door stays shut.
Yeah. That's so true.
Absolutely.
That is
Well,
so true.
so if you're open to it, I'd love to ask you what I call ripple connection questions. This just gives us a little bit more insight as to who you are and kind of, what makes you tick. Why the Detroit Lions? Not Detroit,
Okay,
sorry,
so,
Detroit Tigers, Detroit Tigers.
well, Detroit Lions, it started with the Detroit Lions,
Oh,
though,
okay.
because yes, it did. So, I was working as an anchor in Baltimore when the Cleveland Browns moved to grew up a Cleveland Browns fan because I'm from the Cleveland
Yeah.
area, and I was invested. I love that team. You know, Canton, Ohio, where football began, it
Yeah.
was just, like, ingrained in my system.
Yeah. Burning
So,
Kozar years. I mean,
oh god, yes, yes, back in the day.
yeah.
So, the Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore, and I was devastated. And I was working in Baltimore as an
Yeah.
anchor, and I had to pretend to be happy for Baltimore when I wasn't. I remember Art Modell spoke at some event, and I was the only one who didn't stand with the standing ovation in Baltimore. I just couldn't do that. So,
You have to remain committed and loyal, right?
right, exactly. So I was unbelievably devastated by that move, and I said, "I'm never rooting for the Cleveland Browns again." And I have kept that promise. So I wanted a team that would break my heart just as much, that would pretty much suck through time. So I chose the Detroit Lions.
And you're a Tigers fan too, right?
Yeah, and that just bled over into the Tigers. Yeah. Um, because Cleveland Indians weren't so great back in those days either, but the Detroit Tigers were
Oh,
better.
yeah.
But now the Lions might be really good. They were
Yeah.
really great last year. They're like the darling team. So, see, my loyalty has paid off.
There you go. Let's see. I mean, no offense, but the Dallas Cowboys will win the next 5 Super Bowls. So
Oh, that's what you always say, Dallas fan.
all credibility just out the window, right? Yeah. Let me ask you what are you reading these days? What kinds of, books, any favorite authors that you're really plugged into? Or because you're in the middle of the semester, you're probably pretty
Mm,
slammed.
I know. I wish I had time. I do like mind candy reading. My favorite author is Tana French. I really like her. I think she has great character development, and I think that, my next goal is to write a book, so I keep
Oh,
reading these great novels.
excellent.
So I'm hoping it,
Rubs
seeps
off.
into
Yeah.
my pores, right? So Tana French is my favorite author. What am I reading now? I'm gonna go to my book thing. I will go there and see. I am reading Hard Rain by Samantha Jane Allen, and the reason I like
Okay.
Samantha Jane Allen is she writes books from a Southern perspective,
Mhm.
and it like opens my mind to things. So I'm reading her book because sometimes even fiction helps open your mind.
Yeah, I love it. When you
Because
write your
I have
book.
this thing about Texas, it takes
Yeah.
place in Texas. So
Yeah?
I'm like, oh, Texas. But then I'm reading this book and I'm like, oh, I love those people.
Well, you have to come to Austin, and I'll take you around and show you a different perspective. I mean,
Oh,
no
Austin's
offense, we are
great.
California East now because we have so many
I
people.
know people are moving.
Yeah,
No, I love Houston, I love Dallas, I love Austin, um, but some places in Texas I don't understand.
yeah,
But reading books like this, it helps me. So that's why I'm reading this book
I love it.
right now.
Well, when you do write your book, is it going to be fiction or nonfiction?
It's going to be fiction,
Okay,
and it's going to be about a reporter who is obsessed with a story, sort of like I was with Phyllis, but it'll be much darker.
okay, I love it. Where do you find your inspiration now?
Hmm. Gosh, in so many different places. Hmm. That's a hard one. From my students, somewhat,
Yeah,
because they have really interesting different ideas and different takes on things than my generation. So, kind of opens my mind to different possibilities. Although I don't like to go too far into their ideas because some of them freak me out. Um, so, hmm. I don't know, it comes from so many different places. I might read a story in a newspaper and say, "Wow, I've never thought about it that way. Let me explore further. Maybe this is my next podcast. Maybe this is my next project." Um, when I left CNN, I was so discouraged because I thought that I added to uh, the incivility in our country.
hmm,
Just by being a cable news anchor during those very contentious elections. So I was very much inspired by that feeling, right? And that's why I teach my classes the way I do and why I have this exchange program between my alma mater in Ohio and LMU.
I love that. Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you've received and how have you used it?
Oh, wow. Let's see. What's the best piece of advice I've had?
I feel pretty good. I'm stumping, a rock star
I
journey.
know. I never really stopped to really think about these things. Um, I think that came from my mother who said, "Remember, you can do anything."
Oh, that's great advice.
Yes. Believe in yourself and then do it.
Uh,
That was always her advice. And, she was very much a woman of her time. So that was really meaningful coming from her because she didn't get to live so many of her own dreams. But I remember talking to her about, wanting to become a reporter. My dad was like, "Oh, are you crazy? Be your brother's legal secretary. It's safer. You'll have children, blah, blah." And I'm like, "No." So, and I would go to my mother and she would say, "Remember, you can do anything. Believe in yourself. You just have to go do it." So I would say, go do it.
Go
Believe in
do it.
yourself. Go do it.
That's great. That's great advice. What's your superpower?
Empathy.
Yeah,
I think so.
that's a good one.
Empathy.
Yeah. What's the most important thing in life?
Um, Love. It really is.
Yeah.
We talk about, I don't like it because I'm not a religious person, but I teach at this Jesuit university, so sometimes I run into a priest or two. But I think that when you think about Jesus, it all boils down to love because that's all he ever preached.
Yeah.
Just love one another. Love your enemy, love your friend, love.
That,
So I would say that
that's
because
great.
if everything's based in that, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, three real short questions. What's the best thing you could hear a student or a colleague or maybe a former coworker, say about Carol Costello?
You've changed my life. And I've been lucky enough to hear that a few times from students, and,
Ah,
I can't tell you how great that makes you feel.
absolutely.
I think in this time of the difficulties many educators face, they are so important in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, think about your teachers growing up, and I bet you remember their names, the ones
Yeah.
that have affected your life, right?
Absolutely.
So when we attack teachers or diminish what they do or make things harder for them, that's just wrong. They're
Yeah.
so important in our lives in so many different ways. And it's not brainwashing. It's in
Right.
opening a person's mind to be who they are, whoever that might be. Um, I think that that is so important.
I agree. And what a great, powerful reminder. What does the ripple effect mean to you?
Hmm, gosh, I really do think going back to my story about the parrot, that story and my doing that story and my realizing the importance of that story affected me in so many different ways and made me, I would say, it helped me on my way to becoming a journalist who never got cynical, right? So that story affected how I wrote so many other stories. It created this ripple affected me that made me realize that what I say on the air matters.
Yeah.
How I write a story matters. That there is a person on the other end who cares in different kinds of ways about what they hear, and what I say will affect them. I never took my platform for granted.
Yeah. That's great. Well, what kind of ripple can I be creating for you?
Oh my goodness, you've inspired me to think more deeply about so many things.
Well, thank you. I'm honored.
Oh, really? I think thinking deeply is so important because, well, it inspires you to do things you never thought you would, and I think it just, I don't know. I like opening my mind and thinking deeply, and then putting those thoughts into action. So I think that's what this has done for me today.
Uh, well, thank you. I'm truly honored. I really am. What is the best way for people to follow you?
I have a Instagram at Carol Costello, so that's simple. And then, of course, Blind Rage. You can
Yeah.
find it wherever you listen to your podcast. Um, Usually, I live on Instagram mostly. I don't do Twitter anymore because
Yeah.
it's just too vile.
Yeah.
It's like I'm done. I
Yep.
So I do Instagram. That's
Okay.
where you can find me.
Fantastic. And we'll put your handle up on the show notes as well. And Carol, it was just an absolute honor to have this time with you. I am so inspired by you and your approach. I hope this isn't the last time. I hope we can keep rippling at some level because the work you've done inspired me. The work you're doing inspires me. You're making a huge difference in the world and you're a great rippler. So keep it up.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And guys, we'll be back with another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast very soon. But until then, ripple on.